When my son passed away, my daughter-in-law said, "Don't be dramatic. Pack your bags and learn to survive." I wiped my tears and lived in my car for 2 weeks. That's when my son's lawyer called with some good news. I never imagined that losing my son would be the second worst thing to happen to me that week. Carlton had been gone for exactly 7 days when Cleo walked into the living room where I sat folding his old sweaters, tears falling silently onto the soft wool. The funeral flowers were still fresh in their vases, their cloying sweetness mixing with the scent of his cologne that still lingered on his clothes. "Naden, we need to talk," she said, her voice sharper than I'd ever heard it. Not the gentle, sympathetic tone she'd used at the funeral when people were watching. I looked up, expecting maybe a conversation about the children or perhaps arrangements for Carlton's belongings. My daughter-in-law stood in the doorway, wearing designer jeans and a silk blouse that probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check. Her perfectly manicured nails drummed against the door frame. "Of course, honey, what is it?" Cleo stepped into the room, but didn't sit down. She remained standing, towering over me as I sat curled on Carlton's favorite armchair, the one he'd insisted on keeping, even though it clashed with her modern decor. "I've been thinking about the house situation," she began. Something cold settled in my stomach. With Carlton gone, things need to change. The kids and I need space to grieve properly. And honestly, having you here is just too much right now. I blinked, trying to process her words. "Too much? You're always crying, always touching his things, always talking about him like he's still here. It's not healthy for the children to see their grandmother falling apart like this." Her voice was steady, clinical almost. They need stability, not constant reminders of what they've lost. My hands were still on the sweater I'd been folding, Carlton's favorite gray cardigan that he wore every Sunday morning while reading the paper. He'd worn it just 3 weeks ago before the cancer took its final vicious turn. "Cleo, this is my home too. Carlton and I discussed this before he got sick. He wanted me to stay here to help with the kids, to be close to family." My voice came out smaller than I intended. She let out a short laugh that held no warmth. "Carlton said a lot of things when he was medicated and not thinking clearly. The reality is that this house belongs to me now, and I need you to pack your things." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt the air leave my lungs, and for a moment, the room seemed to tilt. "Pack my things? Don't be dramatic, Naden. You're a grown woman. Make your arrangements and learn to manage on your own. Carlton always said you were stronger than you acted." She paused, studying her reflection in the hallway mirror and smoothing down her blonde hair. "Besides, you'll figure something out. You always do." I thought about the small savings account Carlton had helped me maintain. Barely enough for a security deposit on a studio apartment. Certainly not enough for first and last month's rent in this expensive suburb where my grandchildren lived, where Carlton was buried, where my entire life existed. What about Emma and James? I watched them every day after school. I help with homework. I cook dinner. My voice trailed off as I saw her expression. "I'll figure that out. Maybe it's time they learn more independence anyway. Carlton babied them too much, and honestly, so do you." The casual cruelty in her tone made my chest ache. These were her own children she was talking about. The same children who ran to me when they scraped their knees, who asked me to read them stories, who called me their best grandma because I was their only grandma. Cleo's parents had never shown much interest in being grandparents. "How long do I have?" I managed to ask. "I'd like you gone by tomorrow evening. I have some people coming to look at redecorating Carlton's office, and I don't want any awkwardness." Tomorrow evening. 24 hours to dismantle the life I'd built here over the past 5 years. Ever since Carlton had insisted I sell my little apartment across town and move in to help with the kids when Cleo went back to work. "Where am I supposed to go, Cleo?" "I don't have anywhere lined up. Can I have a week, maybe 2, just to find something?" Her expression didn't soften. If anything, it grew more impatient. "Naden, I really need you to stop making this harder than it has to be. Carlton's gone. The situation has changed. You're not my responsibility." "Not her responsibility." After 5 years of cooking dinners she was too busy to make, of staying up with sick children while she traveled for work, of keeping this household running while she maintained her social calendar. After 5 years of being the grandmother who never missed a school play or soccer game, who remembered every favorite snack and bedtime story, I nodded slowly, not trusting my voice to remain steady. "I'll pack tonight." As I started to rise from the chair, Cleo's voice stopped me. "Oh, and Nain, I'd appreciate it if you didn't make a big scene with the children. They're already dealing with enough trauma. The last thing they need is to see you having some kind of breakdown." That night, I packed my belongings in the same suitcases I'd brought when I moved in. It was shocking how little I actually owned. Most of the furniture in my room had belonged to the house, and I'd gradually given away or donated most of my possessions over the years, keeping only the essentials and a few precious mementos. I tucked Carlton's gray cardigan into my suitcase, along with a framed photo of him holding the kids on their last Christmas morning. I left behind the small television he'd bought for my room, the comfortable reading chair that had been his housewarming gift to me, and the bookshelf filled with novels we'd shared and discussed over Sunday morning coffee. The hardest part was writing the note for Emma and James. How do you explain to an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old that their grandmother is leaving without making their mother look like the villain? How do you say goodbye without promising to see them soon when you have no idea where you'll be living or how you'll manage it? In the end, I kept it simple. Grandma Nain had to move to a new place, but I love you both so much. Be good for Mommy. Love and hugs always. I left the note on their bathroom mirror where they'd see it in the morning after I was already gone. I couldn't bear to face their confused questions or see their tears. Cleo was right about one thing. They'd already lost their father. They didn't need to watch their grandmother fall apart, too. As dawn broke over the suburban street where Carlton had been so proud to buy his family's dream home, I loaded my car with everything I had left in the world. The trunk barely closed over my belongings, and the back seat held the few groceries I'd managed to grab from the kitchen: crackers, peanut butter, bottled water, things that wouldn't spoil. I sat in the driveway for a long moment, looking up at the house where my son had lived his last years, where my grandchildren were probably still sleeping peacefully in their beds, unaware that their daily constant had just vanished from their lives. Cleo appeared at the front window, coffee mug in hand, watching me with the same expression she might wear while observing a neighbor's yard sale. Making sure I actually left, I realized. Making sure I didn't change my mind and come back to complicate her fresh start, I put the car in reverse and drove away from the only family I had left, with nowhere to go and no idea how I was going to survive what came next. 2 weeks. That's how long a person can live in their car before the shame becomes almost unbearable. I'd parked behind a 24-hour diner on the outskirts of town, far enough from Carlton's neighborhood that I wouldn't risk running into anyone I knew, but close enough that I could still drive by the kids' school sometimes and catch a glimpse of them at recess. Pathetic, maybe, but those moments were the only light in my increasingly dark days. The first few nights, I'd convinced myself this was temporary. I'd find a solution. Maybe a room to rent or a small apartment I could afford. I'd applied to 3 different senior living communities, but the waiting lists were months long, and the deposits were far beyond my reach. The few affordable apartments I'd looked at were in neighborhoods where I was afraid to walk to my car during daylight, let alone live alone at night. My daily routine had become a careful choreography of survival and dignity. Every morning at 6 a.m., when the diner opened, I'd go inside and use their restroom to wash my face and brush my teeth. I'd order a cup of coffee and a piece of toast, the cheapest items on the menu, and sit in a corner booth for as long as I could make them last, sometimes stretching one coffee for 3 hours while I read yesterday's newspaper someone had left behind. The worst part wasn't the physical discomfort, though. Sleeping curled up in the driver's seat had left my entire body aching. It wasn't even the fear, though every night brought new terrors: strange noises, flashlights from security guards making their rounds, the constant worry that someone would realize I was living in my car and call the police. The worst part was the invisibility. I'd become a ghost of my former life. Yesterday, I'd seen my neighbor Margaret at the grocery store where I was buying another loaf of bread and a jar of peanut butter, my diet for the past week. She'd looked right through me as if I wasn't standing 3 feet away. We'd had coffee together dozens of times, had exchanged Christmas cookies for 5 years, and now I was invisible to her. I understood why. I looked homeless because I was homeless. My clothes, even though I tried to keep them clean in the diner's bathroom sink, were wrinkled from sleeping in them. My hair, usually neat and styled, hung limp around my face. I'd lost weight I couldn't afford to lose, and there were dark circles under my eyes that no amount of concealer could hide. But it was more than my appearance. It was like I'd crossed some invisible line that separated the housed from the unhoused. And once you crossed it, people couldn't see you anymore. You became part of the landscape they drove past, a problem they didn't want to acknowledge. The hardest moment came when I decided to drive by Carlton's house, my former home, to see if I could catch sight of Emma and James playing in the backyard. What I saw instead made my stomach clench with a mixture of rage and heartbreak. There was a dumpster in the driveway overflowing with furniture and belongings. I could see Carlton's desk, the one where he'd help the kids with homework every night, his bookshelf still loaded with the novels we discussed over coffee, the comfortable recliner where he'd fallen asleep watching movies with the children on Sunday afternoons. And standing beside the dumpster, directing two men who were carrying out more furniture, was Cleo. She was wearing workout clothes that probably cost more than I'd spent on groceries in the past month. Her phone pressed to her ear, laughing at something the person on the other end was saying. I watched as they brought out the small dining table from Carlton's office, the one where he'd set up his laptop during his last months when the stairs became too difficult. The table where he'd spent hours organizing family photos, writing letters to the kids for future birthdays he knew he wouldn't see. Cleo waved dismissively as they tossed it into the dumpster with a crash that I could hear from half a block away. I drove away before she could see me, my hand shaking so hard I had to pull over in an empty parking lot and sit until the worst of the trembling stopped. How could she just throw away everything that connected the children to their father? How could she erase him so completely, so quickly? That evening, I made the mistake of checking Facebook on the library's public computer during my daily internet session. Cleo had posted a photo of herself in what looked like a completely redecorated living room. Everything was white and chrome and minimalist. Nothing like the warm, comfortable family space where Carlton used to build blanket forts with the kids. The caption read, "Sometimes you have to clear out the old to make room for the new, feeling grateful for fresh starts and new beginnings." The comments were exactly what I expected. Friends praising her strength, her courage, her ability to focus on the future. Someone had even written, "Carlton would be so proud of how well you're handling everything." I closed the browser without reading anymore. That night, huddled in my car behind the diner, I allowed myself to cry for the first time since I'd left. Not the silent tears I'd been leaking for weeks, but deep, wrenching sobs that came from somewhere so buried I'd forgotten it existed. I cried for Carlton, for the grandchildren I might never see again, for the life I'd lost, for the woman I used to be. But mostly I cried because I was starting to believe what Cleo's actions had told me all along, that I was disposable, that 5 years of love and service and sacrifice meant nothing, that I was just an inconvenience to be discarded when I was no longer useful. The crying jag left me exhausted, and I fell asleep slumped against a car door, my cheek pressed against the cold window. I dreamed about Carlton as a little boy, tugging on my apron and asking for help reaching something on a high shelf. In the dream, I was young again, strong again, needed again. I woke up to the sound of my phone ringing, a number I didn't recognize displaying on the cracked screen. For a moment, I considered not answering. In my experience lately, unknown numbers meant bills I couldn't pay or people I couldn't help. But something made me slide my finger across the screen. "Mrs. Peterson, this is Robert Chen from Chen Martinez and Associates. I was your son Carlton's attorney. I've been trying to reach you for several days. We need to discuss some urgent matters regarding Carlton's estate." My heart started racing. In my experience, lawyers calling meant problems, medical bills, insurance issues, things I couldn't afford to deal with. I cleared my throat, trying to sound more put together than I felt sitting in my car behind a diner at 7 o'clock in the morning. "Yes, this is Nain Peterson. I've been trying to reach you for several days. We need to discuss some urgent matters regarding Carlton's estate. Could you come to my office today?" It's quite important. Estate? Carlton had always been careful with money, but I assumed whatever he had would go to Cleo and the children. I'm not sure I understand. Cleo handles all of Carlton's affairs now. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Mrs. Peterson, there are specific provisions in your son's will that concern you directly. Provisions that Mrs. Peterson, Cleo, is not aware of. I really need to speak with you in person. Something in his tone made my pulse quicken. Can you tell me what this is about? Not over the phone. Can you be here at 10 a.m.? I'm located downtown, the Morrison Building on 5th Street. I looked down at my wrinkled clothes and ran a hand through my unwashed hair. Mr. Chun, I should probably mention that I'm going through a difficult time right now. I might not look very presentable. Mrs. Peterson, his voice was gentle but firm. Please come as you are. This cannot wait any longer. 3 hours later, I sat in the most luxurious office I'd ever been in, feeling completely out of place. Robert Chun was a distinguished man in his 50s. With kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, he'd offered me coffee, which I'd accepted gratefully. It was the first decent cup I'd had in weeks. Mrs. Peterson, before we begin, I need to ask you something, and please answer honestly. What is your current living situation? The question caught me off guard, and I felt heat rise to my cheeks. I'm between homes at the moment. His expression grew concerned. Carlton mentioned that there might be issues with Cleo after his passing. Are you staying with friends or family? The kindness in his voice almost undid me. I looked down at my hands wrapped around the warm coffee mug. I'm staying in my car. I see. He made a note on his legal pad, and I expected judgment, but his face showed only compassion. Carlton was a very intuitive man. He anticipated this might happen. He pulled out a thick manila folder and opened it carefully. Mrs. Peterson, I need to read you several sections of your son's will. But first, let me ask, what do you know about Carlton's financial situation? Not much. I know he had life insurance through his work and the house, but I assumed it all went to Cleo and the children. Mr. Chen nodded slowly. Carlton came to see me about 8 months ago, shortly after his cancer diagnosis. He was very specific about certain changes he wanted to make to his will. Changes that he asked me to keep completely confidential until after his death. He pulled out a document and adjusted his glasses. Let me read you the relevant section. To my beloved mother, Nain Peterson, who sacrificed so much for my happiness and well-being throughout my life, I leave the sum of $7 million to be held in trust and managed by Chin Martinez and Associates until such time as Mrs. Peterson can establish stable housing and financial management. The words seemed to hang in the air. I stared at him, certain I'd misheard.
I'm sorry.
Could you repeat that? $7 million. Mrs. Peterson, your son was far wealthier than most people knew. He'd been making extremely successful investments for years, and his life insurance policy was substantial. I felt dizzy. But Cleo said everything belonged to her now. Mrs. Peterson, may I ask what exactly Cleo told you? The words tumbled out. The expulsion from the house, the casual cruelty, the complete dismissal of my 5 years of service to the family. As I spoke, Mr. Chen's expression grew increasingly grim. Carlton specifically anticipated this scenario. He said when I finished, "There's more to the will that you need to hear." He flipped to another page. In the event that my wife, Cleo Peterson, attempts to remove my mother from the family home or otherwise cut off contact between my mother and my children, full custody of Emma Peterson and James Peterson shall immediately transfer to my mother, Nain Peterson, with all necessary financial support included. My coffee mug slipped from my numb fingers, and Mr. Chen quickly moved to catch it before it hit his expensive carpet. Custody? But how is that possible? Carlton filed all the necessary paperwork months ago. He documented several concerning behaviors he'd observed in Cleo, her increasing focus on his life insurance payouts, her comments about starting fresh after his death, her apparent lack of emotional connection to the children's grief process. He pulled out another folder, this one thicker. Carlton also set up recordings of several conversations with Cleo during his final weeks. Conversations where she discussed her plans for after his death, including her intention to send you away and possibly relocate the children to be closer to her sister in California. He recorded her with legal counsel's guidance. Yes. Carlton was very concerned about his children's welfare. He'd noticed that Cleo seemed to view them more as accessories to her lifestyle than as individuals with their own needs. Mr. Chen opened another document. There's also a letter he wrote to you to be delivered with this information. Would you like me to read it, or would you prefer to read it privately? My hands were shaking so badly, I didn't trust myself to hold paper. Could you read it, please? He unfolded a sheet of paper covered in Carlton's familiar handwriting. Mom, if you're hearing this, it means my worst fears about Cleo have come true. I'm so sorry I couldn't warn you while I was alive. But I was afraid she'd turn the kids against you if she knew what I suspected about her true feelings toward our family. I've been watching her for months, and I've seen how she looks at you when she thinks no one is paying attention. I've heard her on the phone with her sister talking about how much easier her life will be when she doesn't have to deal with Carlton's needy mother anymore. I know she probably told you that you're not wanted, that you're a burden. She's wrong. You are the most loving, selfless person I've ever known. You gave up your own comfort to help us, and I will never forget that. The money I'm leaving you isn't just an inheritance. It's payment for all the years you put our needs before your own. It's also my way of making sure you have the power to protect Emma and James the way you always protected me. I know Cleo will fight this, but I've made sure she can't win. You are their grandmother, and you love them in a way she never has and never will. They need you, Mom. I need you to take care of them. Don't let guilt or doubt stop you from claiming what's rightfully yours. You earned every penny, and those children need at least one parent who puts their emotional well-being first. I love you, and I'm sorry I waited so long to make sure you were protected. Your grateful son, Carlton. By the time Mr. Chen finished reading, tears were streaming down my face. Not tears of grief this time, but something else entirely: relief, vindication, and underneath it all, a growing sense of power I hadn't felt in weeks. When can we proceed with the custody transfer? I asked, my voice steadier than it had been in days. Mr. Chen smiled. We can file the paperwork this afternoon, but first let's get you out of that car and into a hotel while we arrange for more permanent housing. Carlton set aside funds specifically for your immediate needs. As we discussed logistics, I felt something shifting inside me. For 2 weeks, I'd been a victim of circumstances, of Cleo's cruelty, of my own helplessness. But sitting in that office, learning about the elaborate safety net my son had constructed around me and his children, I realized I wasn't a victim anymore. I was about to become the most important person in Emma and James' lives. With the financial means to give them everything they needed and the legal authority to protect them from their mother's emotional neglect, Carlton had given me more than money. He'd given me purpose, power, and the chance to honor his memory by loving his children the way he'd always loved me. For the first time in weeks, I smiled. 3 days later, I stood in front of the house that had been my home for 5 years. But this time, everything was different. This time, I held legal documents that changed everything. Mr. Chen had insisted on accompanying me along with a social worker from the county and a police officer. Standard procedure for custody transfers, he'd explained. I'd spent the previous 2 nights in a comfortable hotel suite, eating room service, and taking long, hot showers, while Mr. Chen's office arranged for emergency housing assistance and processed the legal paperwork. I was wearing new clothes, nothing fancy, but clean and properly fitted. I'd gotten my hair styled and felt more like myself than I had in weeks. But the biggest change wasn't visible. It was the way I carried myself, the quiet confidence that came from knowing I wasn't powerless anymore. Remember, Mr. Chen said quietly as we walked up the front path. Let me do most of the talking initially. This will be a shock to Mrs. Peterson, and she may react emotionally. The police officer, a kind-faced woman named Officer Martinez, nodded toward the house. I can see movement inside. Looks like someone's home. I pressed the doorbell, the same doorbell I'd heard thousands of times, but never as a visitor with legal authority. Through the frosted glass, I could see Cleo's figure approaching. She was probably expecting a delivery, Or maybe one of her friends stopping by to admire her redecorating project. The door swung open, and Cleo's expression went through several rapid changes: confusion, recognition, annoyance, and finally something approaching panic as she noticed the official entourage behind me. "Nain, what is this? What are you doing here?" Mr. Chen stepped forward smoothly. "Mrs. Peterson, I'm Robert Chen, Carlton's attorney. We need to discuss some important legal matters concerning your children. May we come in?" "I don't understand. Nain, why are there police here? Are you in some kind of trouble?" The irony wasn't lost on me. Even now, even seeing me with lawyers and official documentation, Cleo's first assumption was that I was the problem, that I was the one who had done something wrong. "Mrs. Peterson," Officer Martinez said gently, "we're here to execute a legal custody transfer. May we step inside so we can discuss this privately?" Cleo's face went pale, but she stepped back to let us in. The living room looked exactly as it had in her Facebook photos: sterile, expensive, and completely devoid of anything that suggested children lived here. Gone were Carlton's warm touches, the family photos, the comfortable furniture where the kids used to do homework and watch movies. "Where are Emma and James?" the social worker asked, consulting her clipboard. "They're at school," Cleo said automatically, then seemed to realize the implications of the question. "Wait, what did you mean by custody transfer? What is this about?" Mr. Chen opened his briefcase and pulled out the documents we'd discussed. "Mrs. Peterson, I need to inform you of certain provisions in your late husband's will that are now taking effect." As he read the relevant sections aloud, I watched Cleo's face transform. The polished mask she always wore began to crack, revealing something raw and desperate underneath. "That's impossible," she interrupted, her voice rising. "Carlton never said anything about this. You're lying." "I have all the original documents here, Mrs. Peterson, including audio recordings of conversations between you and Carlton where these concerns were discussed." "Recordings?" Her voice was a whisper now. Mr. Chen pulled out a small digital device. "Carlton documented several conversations where you discussed your plans for after his death, including your intention to remove Mrs. Nain Peterson from the children's lives and potentially relocate to California." He pressed play, and Carlton's voice filled the room. Even after weeks, hearing him speak made my chest tighten with grief. "Cleo, I need to know what your plans are for Mom after I'm gone." Cleo's recorded voice was cold. "Matter of fact, Carlton, we've talked about this. Your mother is lovely, but she's not my responsibility. The kids and I need space to heal and move forward." "Move forward to where?" "I've been thinking California might be nice. Fresh start, closer to my sister. The kids would love the beaches. And Mom? Your mother is a grown woman, Carlton. She'll figure something out." The recording continued, but I stopped listening to the words. Instead, I watched Cleo's face as she heard her own voice dismissing me so casually, discussing my future like I was a piece of furniture she needed to dispose of. When the recording stopped, the silence in the room was deafening. "How dare you?" Cleo whispered, and for a moment, I thought she was talking to Mr. Chen. Then she turned to me, her eyes blazing with fury. "How dare you come into my home with these people and try to take my children?" "They're not just your children," I said quietly, speaking for the first time since we'd entered. "They're Carlton's children, too. And, according to his will, they're now my responsibility. You can't do this. I'll fight it. I'll prove you're unfit. You're homeless. You have no job, no money." Mr. Chen cleared his throat. "Mrs. Peterson, I should inform you that Mrs. Nain Peterson is now the beneficiary of a $7 million inheritance from Carlton's estate. Her housing and financial situation have been completely resolved." The number hit Cleo like a physical blow. She actually stumbled backward, catching herself against the white leather sofa that had replaced Carlton's comfortable old sectional. $7 million. Her voice was barely audible, but the life insurance was only $2 million. I already received that. Carlton had significant investments and assets beyond the life insurance policy, Mr. Chen explained patiently. Assets that he chose to leave to his mother along with custody of his children. I watched Cleo's mind racing, trying to process this information. I could see the exact moment when the reality hit her. Not only had she lost the children, she'd lost access to the money she'd probably been counting on.
"This isn't fair," she said.
And for the first time, her voice broke. "I'm their mother. I've taken care of them for years. Have you?" The question came out of me before I could stop it. "When was the last time you helped Emma with her nightmares about losing her daddy? When did you last sit with James while he cried because he missed his father's bedtime stories?" Cleo's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. "When did you last cook them a meal instead of ordering takeout? When did you last ask them how they're feeling instead of telling them to move on because their grief was inconvenient for your timeline?" "That's not, I was grieving too." "No," I said, my voice growing stronger. "You were redecorating. You were planning your fresh start. You were throwing away their father's belongings and telling them not to be dramatic when they asked questions." The social worker looked up from her notes. "Mrs. Peterson, the children will need to be picked up from school today. Do you have arrangements for their belongings?" Cleo looked around the sterile living room as if seeing it for the first time. "Their things. Their clothes are upstairs, their toys. Most of their toys are in storage or were donated," Officer Martinez observed, consulting a report on her phone. "According to the documentation we received, several boxes of children's belongings were removed from the house last week." I felt my anger building again. You got rid of their toys, their father's things, and their toys. I was trying to help them heal. Cleo's voice was desperate now. All those old things just reminded them of what they'd lost. "Those old things were their connections to their father," I said. "Those were the memories they'll need when they're older, when they want to remember how much he loved them." The social worker closed her notebook. "Mrs. Peterson, we'll need to collect the children at 3:15 when school dismisses. Mrs. Nadine Peterson has temporary housing arranged, and permanent housing will be established within the week." As the official group began to file out to prepare for the school pickup, Cleo grabbed my arm. "Nain, please. You don't understand what you're doing. Those kids need stability and routine. I can provide that." I looked down at her hand on my arm, remembering all the times I'd reached out to her over the years, offering help, comfort, support, only to be politely but firmly pushed away. "Cleo," I said gently, removing her hand from my arm. "You had your chance to provide stability. Instead, you provided a hotel room, service meal, and a redecoration project." I walked toward the door, then paused and turned back. "The children will be allowed to see you, of course. Carlton wanted them to have a relationship with their mother, but it will be supervised visits, and it will be on my terms." "This isn't over," she called after me. But her voice lacked conviction. As we drove toward the elementary school, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and anticipation. Sadness for the family that Carlton had tried so hard to hold together. An anticipation for the chance to give Emma and James what they really needed. Not a perfect house or expensive clothes, but someone who would listen to their fears, honor their father's memory, and love them unconditionally. The way Carlton had always loved me. The first thing Emma said when she saw me waiting outside her classroom wasn't, "Grandma Nain," or "What are you doing here?" It was a whisper that broke my heart. "Are you real, or am I dreaming again?" I knelt down to her level, ignoring the curious stares from other parents and teachers. "I'm real, sweetheart, and I'm here to take you and James home. But Mommy said, you went away because you didn't want to live with us anymore." Her voice was so small, so careful, like she was afraid the wrong words might make me disappear again. I felt the social worker's gentle hand on my shoulder, a reminder that I needed to be careful how I responded, that everything I said would be part of the official record. But looking into Emma's confused 8-year-old eyes, I couldn't bring myself to care about documentation. "Your mommy was wrong, Emma. I never wanted to leave you. I love you and James more than anything in the world." James appeared from his classroom down the hall, his 10-year-old swagger faltering the moment he spotted me. For a second, his face lit up with pure joy. Then he seemed to remember something, and his expression closed off. "Mom said you were mad at us," he said when he reached us, his voice trying to sound casual but failing. "She said that's why you left without saying goodbye." I looked between these two beautiful children, seeing the careful walls they'd built around their feelings, the way they'd learned to protect themselves from disappointment. In just 2 weeks, They'd already started adapting to a world where people they loved could vanish without warning. James, Emma, I need you both to listen to me very carefully, I said, sitting down on the hallway floor so we were all at the same level. I didn't leave because I was mad at you or because I didn't want to live with you. I left because your mother asked me to leave, and I thought I had to do what she said. But you're our grandma, Emma said, tears starting to form in her eyes. Grandmas aren't supposed to leave. You're absolutely right. Grandmas aren't supposed to leave, and I'm never leaving you again. The social worker cleared her throat gently. Children, your grandmother is going to be taking care of you from now on. She has a nice place for you to stay, and all the legal paperwork has been completed. James's eyes widened. You mean we don't have to live with Mom anymore? The question hung in the air, and I realized that these children had been just as unhappy with their post-Carlton life as I'd suspected. They'd been grieving not just their father, but the warmth and comfort that had disappeared from their home along with him. You'll still see your mother, I explained carefully.
But you'll live with me.
We'll have our own place with room for all your things and all your memories of Daddy. Can I have pictures of Daddy in my room? Emma asked immediately. Mommy put them all away because she said they made her too sad. You can have as many pictures as you want. We'll make a whole wall of Daddy pictures, if that's what makes you happy. James looked skeptical. Mom said you don't have any money, and that's why you had to leave. How can you take care of us if you don't have money? I smiled, thinking about the conversation I'd had with Mr. Chan about how to explain the inheritance to children. Your daddy made sure I'd have everything I need to take care of you. He was very smart about money, and he loved us all very much. Daddy left you money. Emma's eyes were wide. He left me something much more important than money. Emma, he left me the job of taking care of his most precious treasures, you and James. The drive to our temporary housing, a furnished 3-bedroom apartment that Mr. Chen's office had arranged, was quiet. Both children sat in the back seat, occasionally whispering to each other, processing this massive change in their lives. When we arrived, I watched their faces as they took in the modest but comfortable space. It wasn't the showcase home they'd been living in with Cleo, but it felt warm in a way that house hadn't for months. This is your room, Emma, I said, showing her the smaller bedroom. I'd already started decorating with some of her favorite things. I'd managed to salvage a few stuffed animals, some books, the nightlight that looked like a butterfly, and James. This one is yours. James stood in the doorway of his room, looking around at the twin bed, the desk where he could do homework, the bookshelf waiting to be filled. It's smaller than my room at Mom's house, he observed. That's true. Is that okay? He was quiet for a long moment. It feels warmer, he said finally, like someone who loves me picked it out. That first evening, we ordered pizza and sat on the living room floor eating it straight from the box, something Cleo never would have allowed in her perfectly maintained house. I told them stories about their father as a little boy, stories they'd never heard before, and watched them laugh for the first time in weeks. Daddy really put peanut butter in his hair? Emma giggled. He was convinced it would make his hair grow faster, so he could look like his favorite baseball player. Your grandfather was not amused when he came home from work and found Carlton's hair full of Skippy. What did Grandpa do? James asked, completely absorbed in the story. He sat your daddy down in the kitchen and spent 2 hours washing his hair with dish soap. And then he told him that if he wanted to be like his baseball hero, he should practice hitting and catching instead of experimenting with condiments. As the evening wore on, I noticed small things that broke my heart. Emma automatically started cleaning up the pizza boxes and napkins without being asked, something she'd clearly been trained to do to keep Cleo's house spotless. James kept glancing at the clock and asking if it was time for bed, as if he was worried about breaking some rule. Emma, sweetheart, you don't have to clean up. We can do it together in a little while. But Mom says if we don't clean up right away, we make extra work for other people. Your mom was right that it's good to be helpful, I said carefully. But in our house, we don't have to worry about making everything perfect all the time. Sometimes it's okay to just relax and enjoy being together. That night, after both children were settled in their beds, I sat in the living room and called Mr. Chin to update him on the transition. How are they adjusting? He asked. Better than I expected. But there are signs that they've been walking on eggshells for months. They're afraid to make messes, afraid to be too loud, afraid to show too much emotion. That's consistent with what Carlton documented in his notes about Cleo's parenting style. The good news is that children are resilient. With consistent love and patience, they'll remember how to be children again. Over the next few weeks, I watched Emma and James slowly come back to life. Emma started having tea parties with her stuffed animals again instead of keeping them lined up perfectly on her shelf. James began leaving his baseball glove on the kitchen counter and his homework spread across the dining table instead of immediately putting everything away. They started asking questions about their father. Not just the sanitized memories Cleo had allowed, but real questions about his childhood, his fears, his dreams, his sense of humor. I showed them videos on my phone of Carlton teaching them to ride bikes, of family barbecues, of quiet Sunday mornings when he'd make pancakes in funny shapes. Daddy was really scared of spiders? James asked one evening as we looked through old photo albums, terrified. When he was about your age, he called me screaming from the bathroom because there was a spider on the wall. I had to come upstairs and capture it with a cup and a piece of paper. But Dad wasn't scared of anything, Emma protested.
Oh, sweetheart.
Everyone is scared of something. Your daddy was scared of spiders and thunderstorms. And the first time he had to give a presentation at work. But being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do what you need to do even when you are scared. These conversations were healing for all of us. The children were reclaiming their father as a real person rather than the perfect memory Cleo had tried to preserve. And I was remembering Carlton not just as the son I'd lost, but as the man who'd loved his children enough to protect them even after his death. But the real breakthrough came on a rainy Saturday afternoon when Emma found me crying quietly in the kitchen while I made lunch. "Grandma Nain, are you sad because of Daddy?" I wiped my eyes and knelt down to her level. "Yes, sweetheart. I miss him very much. Do you ever feel sad about Daddy?" She nodded solemnly. "Mommy said I shouldn't cry about Daddy because it makes other people sad, too."
Oh, Emma.
I pulled her into a hug. It's okay to cry when you miss someone you love. Crying doesn't make me sad. It makes me proud that you loved your daddy so much. Can I cry with you sometimes? Always, sweetheart. We can cry together, and we can laugh together, and we can remember Daddy together. That afternoon, all three of us ended up on the couch, sharing memories, tears, and tissues. For the first time since Carlton's death, his children were allowed to grieve properly, to feel their emotions without worrying about how it affected the adults around them. As James fell asleep against my shoulder, and Emma curled up with her head in my lap, I realized that Carlton had given me more than money and legal authority. He'd given me the chance to give his children what they needed most: permission to be human, to feel deeply, to love without fear. And in doing so, he'd saved not just them, but me as well. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of our new home, a modest 3-bedroom house with a backyard where Emma could practice cartwheels and James could throw his baseball against the fence and listen to the sounds of children being children. No tiptoeing around expensive furniture, no whispered conversations, no constant worry about disturbing someone's peace. Emma was upstairs playing music while she organized her rock collection, something that would have sent Cleo into a panic about noise levels and mess. James was in the living room, sprawled on the floor with his homework spread across the coffee table, occasionally calling out math questions for me to help him solve. These were the sounds Carlton had wanted to protect when he made his secret arrangements. This was the life he'd envisioned for his children: messy, loud, real, and full of unconditional love. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. Through the front window, I could see a familiar figure standing on the porch, and my stomach tightened with old anxiety before I reminded myself that things were different now. Cleo stood on my doorstep holding a small gift bag, looking more uncertain than I'd ever seen her. The past 6 months hadn't been kind to her. Word around town was that she'd had to sell the showcase house. Apparently, Carlton's investments and insurance money had been specifically structured so that most of it went to his children's trust fund and to me, leaving her with only enough to start over. Not enough to maintain her expensive lifestyle. "Hello, Nain," she said when I opened the door. "I was hoping I could see the children for a few minutes." "It's not your scheduled visitation day," I said calmly. Over the months, We'd established a routine, supervised visits every other Saturday afternoon with the understanding that any changes needed to be discussed in advance. I know. I brought Emma something for her birthday next week, and I thought maybe we could talk. I studied her face, looking for signs of the manipulation that had once come so naturally to her. Instead, I saw something I'd never seen before: genuine humility. The children are doing homework, I said, but you can come in for a few minutes. She followed me into the living room where James looked up from his math problems with a polite but guarded expression. Hi, Mom.
Hi, sweetheart.
How's school going? Good. I made the honor roll again. His voice was matter-of-fact, neither seeking her approval nor rejecting her interest. That's wonderful, James. Your father would be so proud. Something in her tone was different, softer, less performative. James seemed to notice it too because his posture relaxed slightly. Emma, I called upstairs. Your mother is here. Emma appeared at the top of the stairs, and I watched Cleo's face change as she took in her daughter's appearance. Emma's hair was in a messy ponytail. She was wearing comfortable clothes that had definitely seen better days, and there was a streak of something that might have been paint or marker on her cheek. She looked exactly like what she was, a 9-year-old girl who'd been allowed to be a child. Hi, Mommy, Emma said, coming down the stairs, but stopping a few steps from the bottom. I brought you an early birthday present, Cleo said, holding out the gift bag. Emma looked at me for permission before accepting it. Another sign of how much their relationship had changed. Inside the bag was a small silver locket, not expensive or flashy, just simple and pretty. It has a picture of Daddy in it, Cleo said quietly. I thought you might like to wear it sometimes. Emma opened the locket and smiled when she saw Carlton's photo inside. Thank you, Mommy. It's really pretty. Would you like me to help you put it on? Emma nodded, and for a few minutes, they worked together to fasten the chain around her neck. It was the most natural interaction I'd seen between them since before Carlton's death. After Emma went back upstairs and James returned to his homework, Cleo and I stood in the kitchen, the space thick with unspoken words. They look happy, she said finally. They're happy. They're allowed to be sad sometimes, too, which is equally important, she nodded slowly. I wanted to apologize, Nain, for how I treated you after Carlton died. For the things I said. I leaned against the counter, studying her face. What changed? Losing them, she said simply. Losing the children made me realize that I'd been losing them already, bit by trying to control everything instead of just loving them. And in seeing how much they've thrived with you made me understand that Carlton was right. He knew what they needed, and he knew I wasn't ready to give it to them. It was the closest thing to accountability I'd ever heard from Cleo, and I found myself softening slightly despite myself. They still need their mother, I said carefully. Just not the mother you were trying to be. They need you to be real with them, to let them see your emotions, to admit when you make mistakes. I don't know how to do that. I was raised to keep everything together, to never let anyone see you struggle. Carlton struggled, too, especially at the end. But he let the children see that it was okay to be scared, okay to be sad, okay to need help. That's what made him such a good father. Cleo was quiet for a long moment, then said something that surprised me. You're a good grandmother, Nain. Better than I ever gave you credit for. I love them. That's all I've ever done. No, it's more than that. You listen to them. You see who they really are instead of trying to make them into who you think they should be. As she prepared to leave, Cleo paused at the front door. Nain, would it be possible to schedule an extra visit next week for Emma's birthday? I'd like to take both children out for ice cream, just the three of us. I considered the request. 6 months ago, I would have been terrified to let the children go anywhere alone with Cleo. But the woman standing in front of me wasn't the same person who'd thrown away Carlton's belongings and dismissed my grief. She wasn't completely transformed. That would take years if it happened at all, but she was trying. 1 hour, I said. And they call me when you pick them up and when you drop them off. Thank you. After she left, James looked up from his homework. Grandma Nain, do you think Mom is getting better? It was such a perceptive question from a 10-year-old, and I realized that these children had been watching their mother just as carefully as I had. "I think she's trying to get better," I said honestly. "What do you think?" "She seemed sadder, but nicer," he said thoughtfully. "Like maybe she misses Dad the way we do now." That evening, after both children were in bed, I sat on the back porch with a cup of tea and thought about the strange journey that had brought us to this point. 6 months ago, I'd been sleeping in my car, convinced that I was unwanted and unnecessary. Tonight, I was the legal guardian of 2 thriving children, living in a comfortable home with enough financial security to never worry about basic needs again. But the money wasn't the real gift Carlton had given me. The real gift was purpose. For the first time in years, I woke up every morning knowing exactly why I was needed. Not as a convenient babysitter or household helper, but as the person who loved these children unconditionally and would always put their emotional needs first. The next morning, Emma found me in the kitchen making pancakes, Carlton's recipe, with too much vanilla and a pinch of cinnamon that he'd never measured, but somehow always got exactly right. "Grandma Nain," she said, climbing onto her usual stool at the breakfast counter. "I had a dream about Daddy last night. Was it a good dream or a sad dream?"
Good.
"He was making pancakes just like you are, and he told me he was happy that you're taking care of us." I felt tears prick my eyes, but I didn't try to hide them. Emma had learned that it was okay for adults to cry, that tears didn't mean something was wrong. "I'm happy to take care of you, too, sweetheart. It's the best job I've ever had." James stumbled into the kitchen, still in his pajamas, hair sticking up in every direction. "Are those Dad's pancakes?" "They are, with extra vanilla, just like he used to make them." As we sat around the breakfast table, syrup dripping onto plates and orange juice spilled on the placemat, I realized that this was what Carlton had been fighting for in those final months. Not just his children's financial security, but their right to live in a home where love was more important than perfection, where grief was allowed to coexist with joy, and where being human was not just tolerated, but celebrated. Outside, I could hear neighbors starting their weekend routines. Lawnmowers humming, children playing in backyards, the normal sounds of families living their lives. We were part of that now, Emma, James, and I. We belonged somewhere again. Later that day, as I tucked Emma into bed, she looked up at me with those serious brown eyes that reminded me so much of Carlton at that age. "Grandma Nain, are you ever going to leave us again?" "Never," I said, smoothing the hair back from her forehead. "I'm going to be right here until you're grown up and don't need me anymore." "And then what will you do?" I smiled, thinking about all the possibilities that stretched ahead of us. "Then I'll be the grandmother who spoils her children and tells them embarrassing stories about how their parents used to eat dirt and put peanut butter in their hair." Emma giggled. "James ate dirt constantly. Your father, too. I think it might be genetic." As I turned off her bed light and headed toward my own room, I caught sight of myself in the hallway mirror. The woman looking back at me was different from the one who'd packed her belongings in shame 6 months ago. She was stronger, more confident, but also softer somehow. She knew her worth now. Carlton had saved us all, his children from a life of emotional neglect, and me from the despair of believing I was disposable. His final gift wasn't just money or legal documents. It was the reminder that love doesn't end with death, that protecting the people we care about sometimes requires difficult choices, and that sometimes the greatest act of faith is trusting someone else to carry on what we started. In my bedroom, I opened the drawer where I kept Carlton's last letter to me, the one Mr. Chun had given me along with all the legal papers. I'd read it dozens of times, but tonight I needed to see his words again. "You are not a burden, Mom. You never were. You are the heart of this family, and I need you to remember that when things get difficult, take care of my children the way you took care of me, with patience, with humor, with unconditional love. They will need you to be strong, but they will also need you to be human. Thank you for everything you sacrificed for me. Now it's my turn to take care of you." I folded the letter fully and put it back in the drawer. Tomorrow was Sunday, which meant pancakes and errands and maybe a trip to the park if the weather was nice. Simple, ordinary family life, the kind Carlton had always treasured, the kind he'd made sure his children would continue to have. For the first time in months, I fell asleep without a single worry about the future. We were exactly where we belonged.